Welcome back to the Changemaker podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is Layla Zaidane. She's the president and CEO of the Millennial Action Project, the largest nonpartisan organization of young lawmakers in the United States. MAP works with over 1,600 millennial and Gen Z elected leaders in Congress and state legislatures to bridge divides, collaborate on future-oriented policy, and scale a healthy culture of democracy. So I could go on with so much more.
Welcome to the Changemaker podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
But thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Deke. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for all of the work you're doing. We're in this together, and we couldn't do it alone. So thank you for what you're doing too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to set the tone for my viewers and listeners, our viewers and listeners, we met in March at a Movement Partners meeting for Starts With Us. You're also a Movement Partner. But one thing about that meeting, it was so incredible to me. You know, you had Will Hurd there. You were there. Brad Raffensperger was there. Katie Couric was there. Andrew Yang, Chef Jose Andres. But it was such a broad spectrum of people. But I was not aware of the work you're doing, which is incredible. But I would say most people are not aware of what you're doing in Congress. So just give us a brief overview of how you got here and what you guys are doing, because part of good leadership is giving people hope. And what you're doing gives me great hope for the future.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for putting me on a list with both Katie Couric and Chef Jose Andres. That is probably a peak achievement right there, just to, be included in that list that you just shared. But it was really exciting to be a part of that conversation and other conversations that we've had since, sharing the work of Millennial Action Project, which, as you mentioned, Deke, is the largest bipartisan network of millennial and Gen Z lawmakers in the country. Our work is really about mobilizing the youngest members of the legislature. So we work in Congress, we work in states as well, to help them build bridges and to work on policy solutions together so that political polarization is not an obstacle to solving big challenges. And, we saw as young people, the biggest threat to our future is political polarization. And if we can solve that, we can start working on all of the different things that young people care about, that future people care about. And my job is to help build those bridges so that all of that change is possible.
Well, here again, so many people. So we conducted a study with Starts With Us with George Washington University that came out back in March that showed that, basically the mainstream media covered the hyper-partisan members of Congress, to the left and the right, 4 times more than, the people that are trying to work in bipartisan fashion and do the right thing in the Congress. So, so many people just picture us as being horribly divided, but you're there in the middle of it. And particularly from the younger lawmakers, what are you seeing?
It's the founding principle of Millennial Action Project is how much we're seeing young people resist this forced binary that has gotten us to where we are today, that has gotten us to a place where it feels so divided, where it's so black and white, where it's us versus them. And, the study that you referenced, Deke, it's not surprising to me that people are, it's like watching a train wreck, right? You can't look away.
Yeah.
We feed off of the drama, off of the conflict, off of the bloodiness. I watch reality TV shows sometimes, not to just see people get along, but to see something terrible happen and to see the fights. And the reality is, reality TV is not what most people's reality is. What we read in the news and what we read about the conflict is not the reality of what's happening in institutions. And we, when MAP was founded, really saw this generational shift, this core hunger to say, we want to be able to have more choice. We want to be able to have more conversations. We want to be able to deal with nuance in a way that we're not really seeing out of our policymaking process right now.
Yeah.
And so as more and more young people are running for office, and as more and more young people are winning elected office, we're actually seeing them bring that culture, that hunger, that demand for a different style of problem solving into Congress, into state legislatures. And, I think a big part of the problem is we don't talk enough about what's going right. We're so over focused on what's going wrong. And the truth is, there's a huge and increasing movement inside our legislatures of people doing things right.
But it's interesting to me that here again, and I don't pin everything on the media, nor do I pin everything on politicians. I did an interview with a friend of mine recently. It's a local anchorman. And he said, we're so negative in the media. And I said, yeah, but we're the consumers. We're buying what you guys are selling us. So we need to demand a better product. But I think it's in the media, it's just said there's an attitude, but we've always done it this way. If it bleeds, it leads, but we've always done it this way. But I think there is a market out there to see the good along with the bad. And so when, part of what good leadership is, as I say, is to give people hope. And I want this program to give people hope. Yeah, are there concerns with Congress? Of course. But tell me what you're seeing. Specifically, you guys are bringing forward legislation at the state and national level that's getting passed in bipartisan fashion, which most people would think in the climate we're given today, oh, well, that's impossible. There's no way that's happening.
Yeah, well, I'm here to tell you it's happening. It's happening all across the country. And the cool part about my job is getting to see that every single day. The way that we operate is we actually have a chapter model. And so there are what's called a future caucus, which is a chapter of the youngest members of the legislature, one in Congress and one in 33 states across the country, has a future caucus chapter led by a bipartisan group of young people. And, just to zero in on one of them, right? Just last year, the Arkansas Future Caucus just had a press conference to stand up and say, hey, we passed 39 pieces of bipartisan legislation through the Future Caucus this year, dealing on things like home ownership, criminal justice reform, education, really issues that matter to people, not just agreeing to rename a post office or something that everybody can agree on, but things that really required some deliberation and some compromise and some debate. We're seeing that it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you tell people you're never going to be able to get something done, if you say that enough times, people start to believe it. And when you flip that and reverse it and you say, this is possible, you can do this, you are the leader who can do this, people believe that too. And so part of it is helping people actually achieve these policy successes. Part of it is also reminding them that they did this, that they are capable of this kind of change in a time where it feels so polarized. And that in turn inspires others.
Let me get your take on this because you're there. You're in Washington, you're in the middle of this. But it seems to me, so I've shared with people, I'm 55. I grew up with people in politics on both sides of the aisle that I really admired and respected because they were statesmen and stateswomen. And they would work with the other side to get bipartisan legislation passed. To me, that's a win. I come from a background in business and real estate. You sit down at a negotiating table until you have a meeting in the minds. There's give and take. Both sides get up. They feel like they might not have gotten everything they wanted, but they did get something. So that's a win, right? Well, now it seems that in some sectors of politics, that even to work with the other side and pass something in bipartisan fashion, that's that's to some, that's not a plus, that's a minus. Well, you worked with the other side, so you're a traitor. And I'm like, well, how are you supposed to solve big picture complex problems without everybody having a seat at the table?
You've hit on one of the core challenges, which is often in today's political culture, it's easier to work with the other side if nobody knows about it.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing a lot of very quiet collaborations that, for lots of different reasons, and you've mentioned a few of them, don't get covered, or they're not incentivized to really shout it from the rooftops. And so that perpetuates a narrative that because people aren't seeing it, it's not happening. And it reinforces this really negative flywheel. And so I think part of what we need to do is demonstrate how collaboration, how bipartisan solutions are actually really effective, are not leading to watered down, insufficient policy solutions, but are actually really good policy that are delivering wins for districts, for people, for voters, and to position that as a source of strength. And so telling those stories and championing the progress that is made when you're able to be innovative and co-create a solution with somebody who has a different perspective from you, going back to the community you represent as a lawmaker and being able to really tout that from a position of strength, I think that's one of the paradigm shifts that need to happen.
It's interesting to me. So for 9 years in office, I focused on economic development, job creation, as well as neighborhood revitalization, which to me is the core of economic development. I mean, if you're taking a neighborhood that's not nice, that's blighted, and you bring it up, you decrease the cost for law enforcement in the neighborhood, right? It puts money back on the tax base. But it seems like some politicians say it's either or. If you support business, you're purportedly a Republican. If you support neighborhood revitalization, you're more than likely a Democrat. And I'm like, it's two halves of the same coin. It's not either or. We can be pro-business and we can be pro-neighborhood revitalization. It's just when we get stuck in this either or, but it's, when you're serving the greater good, there's something in it for everybody.
Yeah. Deke, I'd be really curious to hear more about just your perspective, having seen what it means to be a Republican, what it means to be a Democrat, maybe change or stay the same over time. You've been working at this for a while. I think one of the most interesting phenomenon that we're seeing is that the fastest growing political affiliation is independent. And people are not necessarily feeling totally comfortable with either of those labels. I'm curious, obviously you've got a lot of political experience yourself. Like what does that look like for you?
It's funny, Zella. I'm happily independent. So I think I was just ahead of my time.
That's right.
I think that's why I'm so connected with this generation, is because I think that in order to lead, you have to think independently. So I had before I ran for office, I went to a Republican Party meeting here in Augusta, Richmond County. And we had a newly elected official. This is the early 2000s. But the head of the Republican Party said, she's voted along party lines on every vote she's gone since she's been there. And I'm like, well, we're in the land of artificial intelligence. It doesn't take much artificial intelligence to vote straight party line on everything. So to me, independent thinking is key, but that means that you can't toe the party line on everything. So I love, I believe it's next year, and you probably know this. You know this better than I do, but I believe Generation Z and millennials will make up something like 45% of the electorate, and that they're not married to one party or the other. I think that is significant power. And my take, and I'd love to get your take on this, as I say, and I analyze both parties' positions, but I do think what apparently some in the Republican Party have pitched out there to raise the voting age, I think is very foolhardy and very short-sighted. Because if you did it, not that that'll ever happen, but you've just ticked off a whole generation that are probably not too happy with you to begin with, but trying to purposely disenfranchise them is kind of saying, well, we're never going to get them, so we're not going to do any outreach, and we'll just prolong the inevitable. But I think the shift to independence, I think is great. I think our system disenfranchises independents. When you have to vote in a primary, most of the time you have to say, I'm a Democrat or Republican, when, as you say, the trends show that people are shifting to being independents.
Yeah. Well, so a couple of things that I want to respond to in what you just said. You're totally right. The idea of disenfranchising a generation at the exact moment when we're seeing rising generations become more politically engaged and civic minded. Gen Z is statistically more politically engaged than any generation. About 72% of Gen Zers would say they're politically engaged versus
Amen.
55%
God
of
bless
Gen
Generation
Xers.
Z.
And so that's something we have to nurture. And at the same time, some of the structures and institutions that allow those independent voices and those, even if they do register as a Democrat or a Republican, or they're not affiliated, or they're affiliated as an independent, sort of the systems and structures that enable them to make their voice heard. That's something that can be modernized. It's 2023. Like, let's get with the program. It's not a partisan thing. It's really just matching our political system to the modernization that's happened in every other industry. And which brings me to the third point, which is an idea that you just gave me as you were talking about the time of AI and how much sort of humanness does it take to vote party ticket every single time. What a great incentive for lawmakers to start voting maybe against their party as a job security function. Like, the robots are going to come for your jobs, lawmakers, if you just vote party ticket every single time. Maybe you should start showing some nuance and some courage.
No, I love that, because at the end of the day, I mean, to me, we're human beings, and AI can do whatever it's going to do, but there is no substitute for having a human conversation. And I would say the same thing with your lawmaker. Could that go AI? Sure. But for a constituent to sit down with their elected official and have a conversation is something that AI can replace. So but that's, to me, we talk about the hyperpolarization. If you bring people together, and you've experienced this, of differing political viewpoints, it doesn't matter, if it's not a, political rally to where everybody's like-minded, you're going to have good conversations, but we need to get out of those silos. And when elected officials, get afraid of the next generation, I don't think that that's good. Every generation has something to offer. You know that. You see it when you're out there. I'm like, the creativity of Gen Z, but I will say, for, businesses or anybody to write off a generation, well, they've got no allegiance. Well, they're this, they're that. I'm like, that's the wrong answer for a business or a political party.
Yeah. The thing that is most painful for me as a millennial is discovering with every passing year, I am not the youngest generation anymore. So I think as we talk, I'm, kind of coming to terms with that. But I totally agree. I think there's value in diversity in every sense of the word. And that means political diversity, that means geographic, income, racial, gender, and age. And so it's important to have young voices at the table, especially when we're talking about making decisions for a country of 330 million people. And when we talk about how those decisions get made and the situation we find ourselves in now with hyperpolarization, getting young people to build the muscle memory of doing it in a bipartisan way, there's no better generation to help lead that transformation than those young people who are early on in their political careers, who can build the trust across the aisle and across generations to foster the ability to be good problem solvers, because that's what we want at the end of the day. We want to elect people who can solve problems.
Well, and that's the thing to me is you talk about being, an older millennial or whatever you want to label yourself as. I'm like, I'm 55, I'm Gen X. I'm like, people have called me the millennial whisperer. I'm like, or the godfather of the millennial generation. Now I guess I'm the godfather of Generation Z, of which I'll take all that. Because Neil Young, one of my favorite musicians, was the godfather of grunge and Pearl Jam. And Pearl Jam has shared that with Next Generation. But I think that's what I want to do is mentor, because that's the thing at the local level. And I've shared this with so many people. I shared it just recently. Nobody asks you your political affiliation when they have an issue. They just want their problem solved. And to me, but we've got to get out of the comfort zone of just being around or our tribe, because maybe that is when we talk about the silos. Okay, a win for you is a win to fight against something and stop something happening because the powers that be in your political party don't want to see it happen. So I fought against this and I stopped that from happening. I'm like, leading and winning to me is not all about what did you stop from happening. It's like, what did you make happen? And so if we've got a generation of legislators that can go, I worked with, my Democratic colleague from Pennsylvania, and I'm a Republican from Arkansas, and we happened to get this legislation passed. I'm like, how much cooler of a narrative is there than that? From Arkansas, you're like, oh my gosh, my guy can go up and work with somebody in Pennsylvania to get stuff fast. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I love that mindset. It is very much from a place of abundance and not one of scarcity. And I think too much of how we talk about politics is zero sum. And the reality is you can come from a place of building, a place of innovation that enables you to then say, look what we've created together that is energizing and exciting to the American people. Starts with us, the group we're both a part of, did another study talking about just the exhausted majority and how tired people are of the rhetoric and the lack of action. And when you can help put our decision makers in a mindset that is about building and not breaking, I think you start to get that 87% of the exhausted majority really excited to engage in their civics, in their neighborhoods, in their communities again.
It's interesting to me though. So I tell this story all the time, but I took every opportunity I could to go into schools and visit with students, read to them and everything. And people would ask me, why do you engage with young people so much? Because they don't vote. So now I've got a generation of 20 and 30 something year old leaders here locally that come up to me and say, do you remember when you came and read to my class? So, I'm checking out from an oncologist appointment the other day, obviously got a little health issue, but the lady checking me out said, oh my gosh, you came and spoke to my son in kindergarten. And I'm like, well, where was that? Lake Forest Elementary. I'm like, man, I love going to that school. She said, and you told him he had ants in his pants, and he remembers that to this very day. And I'm like, so, 20 plus years later, where this young man is now a registered voter, I got to speak to him in kindergarten and get him interested in civics. But it's that not looking at the big picture that I think holds us all back.
I could not agree more. I think not looking at the big picture and being impatient, right? And expecting other people to be transactional, of value to you immediately, and to see others as something that you can extract something from, rather than building a relationship, creating trust, investing in a relationship for the sake of having a positive, good relationship. And you don't have to get something out of it. But what ends up happening is you build an environment in which now so much more is possible. And this is such a good example of sort of planting that seed. And 20 years later, this person is now, a voter, is somebody who's involved in
Yeah.
civics, who looks at that one experience with great affection. And you didn't go into that kindergarten classroom to say, I'm going to get this person to eventually vote for my party in 20 years. But you did it because
No.
you cared about the people in that room, and you cared about sort of civic engagement. And I think that sort of approaching relationship building with that mindset, whether you're a voter, whether you're an elected official, will ultimately allow us to bridge some of the gaps and to create a healthier democracy.
Well, and to me, it's as I say, I mean, generations can fear each other. I don't. I get huge inspiration from the generations that come behind me. But it's like somebody told me one time, if you want to win, at anything in life, you've got to focus on winning the next generation. And I'm like, when I say, 45% of the electorate, I believe that's right, next year will be Gen Z and millennials. I'm like, how am I going to, if I want to change the world, nobody can do it individually. But if I want to stay in the game and continue to try to change the world, how am I going to do that without working with millennials and without working with Gen Z and without working with the generation to come behind them? Because as you say, there's impatience. There's no quick fix. I mean, there's no quick fix to immigration. There's no quick fix to climate change. We've got to have generations lined up to work together to overcome these things. And it's doable. It's easily doable, but we've got to work together.
We have no choice. And if anything is proof, not working together hasn't really worked in the past.
No.
And so if nothing else convinces you, right, that it's worth it to try, let that example, that very real example of just fighting each other louder and louder and louder and louder, hasn't really worked. So it's time to try something different. And I think, the role of future generations, of young generations, is such an important part of shifting that culture. And again, seeing this core human desire for belonging, this core human desire to collaborate, for empathy, to be listened to. That means you have to listen to others. Young people have that. And as they're walking into political institutions, it's counterculture. It is very counterculture to how politics sort of normally happens. And so I see a big part of my job is, how do I nurture millennials and Gen Z with this culture change that they can lead? How do we nurture that until it is the culture, not counterculture?
Well, I can help you with that. Because I grew up a punk rock fan. I grew up a rock and roll fan, still am, and rebelling against authority. Some people are like, no, you must have been a Boy Scout. I'm like, hell no, I was not a Boy Scout. I'm like, if you didn't know me up until the age of 25, 26, thank goodness social media was not around then, or I'd have never been mayor. But I'm like, what is more countercultural? And I think counterculture is cool than to rebel against the status quo of extreme polarization. And I will tell you what, I think of what's cool to me. Diversity is cool, hanging out with people from different walks of life. But negativity and anger, I would not put those into the cool category. And I guarantee you, the cool kids of any generation aren't hanging around in rooms full of angry people complaining about why things will never change. The cool kids of any generation are hanging out with the other cool kids of the generations behind them and in front of them, saying, man, you guys are awesome. How do we work together to solve these problems? That, to me, that's where the cool kids are. Define them how you want to, but I don't, just the hip, people that fit in with society's norms, that's not cool to me. It's cool to stand out and be different and take a stand and say, we're not just going to go along with the status quo of extreme polarization. We're going to rebel against it. And you know what? We're going to win. And we are, because I see what you're doing. And now my listeners and viewers get to go, oh my gosh, young people in Congress are doing that? That's pretty freaking amazing.
It is pretty amazing. It is pretty amazing. And these public servants who, as you know, Deke, it is a service to be a public servant.
Yes.
You are giving your all to the community that you serve. And in this moment in time, it is a tough thing to run for office, to serve as an elected official. These bright, talented young people are choosing to do that rather than go off and make a bunch of money somewhere else.
Yeah.
They want to solve problems for their community. This past year in Congress, we saw 40% increase in millennials and Gen Zers represented in Congress. 40% more than the year before. Now, it's still not enough. It's still not representative to the whole country, but it's growing. And I think that is something that people should find inspiring, that young people are seeing that something feels broken or that there's something that they can fix. And instead of saying somebody else should fix that, they're saying, I got this. I have the agency to go fix this. Put me in, coach. And that to me is one of the most energizing parts of this whole thing.
That is the same thing to me. But I'll tell you, Layla, it's sort of like when I say I see me and the generations behind me, the independent mindedness, but I also feel, and getting to mentor that next generation. So I was 37 when I first offered myself to run for mayor. I was taken in a back room and told that I hadn't paid my dues, that Black people wouldn't vote for me because I'm white, that old people wouldn't vote for me because I'm young, and that young people wouldn't vote for me because young people didn't vote. So I'm like, okay, well.
What a pep talk.
Yeah, but I took it as a challenge. And it's like, exactly. I'm like, you're telling me I can't do this? I'm going to show you that I can. But that's my hope because here again, there are probably people at the local level, nationwide, male, female, Black, white, other, that are young, that think, okay, Congress is something I can never do. That probably aren't aware that we've had a 40% increase. That, hey, now there are 40% more people that might be on my same page and my wavelength. So maybe I wouldn't feel as alone or like I'm such an outsider if I went and did it because I've got some people in there now myself.
That's right. And having a community is so powerful. It can feel very lonely to be a leader. It's I think something we've all heard and know that it can be lonely to be a leader, and to be a leader who is doing something counterculture against the status quo. That's even lonelier. And then to do that while at least 50% of people who you're leading are actively sort of mad at you or think that you're doing a bad job just because of the letter behind your name, that's even harder. And so to have a community of other people to say, we're all in this together, regardless of what the letter is after your name. You also are a young person who's trying to do things the right way, who's trying to create a good process for how we talk to each other. That actually builds very powerful bonds that then transcend over time the effects of polarization, these false labels that get put on us, because that's what they are. They're just labels. They're not actually who you are, what you care about, and what you stand for. And so having the permission structure to build those bridges, build those bonds in the first place as young people, to have that be the unifying factor, not your partisan identity, but your generational identity, that can be a quantum leap for how we see progress made in Congress and in states moving forward.
Well, people are like, do you think wholesale change can really happen quickly? And I'm like, oh yeah, I do. They're like, well, why? I'm like, because I'm a huge Nirvana fan. And when Nirvana hit in 93, hair metal was the big thing, so here you have 3 20-something-year-olds out of Seattle, which the blueprint for their success had not been written. It's like, okay, these disaffected youth out of Seattle, they're singing about, their angst and their negativity or whatever. I saw that wave crested where, they're selling grunge outfits at the Gap, at the mall, and white suburban kids are buying them. Now, however many years later, I'm seeing kids at the Y, black, white, wearing Nirvana t-shirts. I'm like, so wholesale change came then when nobody saw it coming. Generational change. So if you can tap into that, there's a cool factor of us rebelling against the authority of the status quo of hyperpolarization. I think change in that can happen quickly. And the more young people, Gen Z, millennials we get in Congress, the faster that happens. Mm-hmm. So I want to help you with your goals and help you in whatever you do. And I don't want to put restrictions on holding back change. I want to actually foster it and light the fire under it and make it happen faster. That's just me, Mr. Vegas.
Well, thank you. And just even telling their stories, right, is incredibly powerful and helpful to the work that they're doing. I'll also say, and you kind of touched on this earlier, the power of mentorship or building relationships across generation. I think change happens slow and then it happens all at once. Yep. And to do that, you need a multi-generational effort that is building towards that moment where the match gets lit. And if you look back on history, right, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, equal rights, so much of that was built off of sustained efforts over generations, mentorship across generations, and then young people saying enough is enough and making that spark that ignites the fast change. And so I feel like we are close to that moment, and it's going to take a multi-generational coalition. I do think that young people are going to be the ones that light that match.
I agree with you completely. And it's, to me, I feel like God has spent 55 years preparing me for this work. And this is the most important work I've ever undertaken in my life. But I would say something that you said is so true. I think it takes so much legwork and building the foundations to where the match can be lit. And I'm like, nothing I do, Martin Luther King is a hero of mine. Nothing I do, with promoting peaceful resistance, bringing people together across all lines. The civil rights movement didn't happen overnight. And it was not just black people. It was black people, white people, male, female, other, generational. But so much legwork went into creating that moment when it could happen. But I do see the same thing happening here. There is nothing new under the sun. And your generation and the generation that's following you, there is so much energy there. And it's just so much fun to watch and to feel like, I can be a part of helping them actually push the boulder over the top of the mountain and watch what the momentum does.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think a lot about is resilience and self-care and how to keep young people in this work, in this movement without burning out.
Yeah.
Because I think we are at this critical tipping point moment, and the job of an elected official being in the belly of the beast is really taxing work. They're in pretty toxic environments, and it's, especially at the state level, really difficult to get your life started, to start a family, to pay off your student debts on the salary of, like a state legislator, for example. And so I think a lot about how do you make sure that those individuals feel like their cup is full, and what are the communities of practice, right? So maybe it's just having friends who are in similar jobs, and that's a lot of what we do, sort of the networking aspect. what is the like fun, cool factor of doing this work that makes them feel joy and makes them feel excited to show up, and like it's not all just draining energy from them to do this work, but they're actually gaining something from it. And I think the more that we can both celebrate the work, but also create spaces for the people who are in the work, like the human beings who are in the work, to celebrate with each other, to just laugh and to feel joy. I think that's actually a really important piece of the puzzle. It's not policy change. It's not sort of structural democracy reform, none of that. It's just about making people smile and laugh and feel like, this is worth it, and I'm willing to be here.
And every day I pray for our government, our elected officials. I pray for our media. So I'm to a point now where I'm like, okay, for me to demonize the media and say it's all their fault, it's not, but I'm doing exactly what I'm saying not to do because I'm painting with a broad brush. I would say the same thing with elected officials. I know because I've been there, the media does have a tendency to make caricatures of them. But I'll tell you, our governor, Governor Brian Kemp, is a good friend of mine. What he went through after the 2020 elections, and, he went through a family tragedy. And so the whole time I'm just texting him saying, keep your head up, keep your head up. I think ultimately for, he and statewide elected officials here to resist the temptation of giving in to a very vocal minority that tried to get them to do something that they shouldn't have done. I think good leadership was rewarded in Georgia for our Secretary of State and our governor doing that. It's hard to give good leadership when it's easy to get distracted by the vocal minority on either side. But as you say, we've got to remember these people are human. And it takes a lot of sacrifice. So don't just demonize politics. Don't just demonize the media. I think it's time that we all ask, how can we help? Because we're all people. I want to help the mainstream media get better. I want to help politicians get better. For me to sit around and just point fingers and place blame solves absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm. Well, Deke, what's your advice to a young, member of Congress or young state legislator? What advice would you give them if they're trying to do this work now of building bridges and getting problems solved?
Call me. No, but no, it's to not get insular. So, and this is a lesson worth sharing. So I was in Chicago speaking at the University of Chicago a number of years ago. And so a driver asked me what I did. I said, well, I'm mayor of Augusta. I said, how's your mayor doing? I won't name names, but he said, well, he's out there in the middle of everything. I said, that could just be that they've got a good press agent. So for, young members of Congress, young elected officials, don't take cameras everywhere you go because people can sense when you're staging something. And that doesn't look authentic and honest if you're just asking people to be a part of promoting you, by making them a part of interviewing them and saying how great you are. Take the bad with the good. Don't buy into you're this, all that. You're a human being. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to get wins. You're going to get criticized. Sometimes, when it's needed and sometimes when it's not. But do not insulate yourself and consider yourself above the people you serve. You are there to be a servant and you are there to serve people, not yourself.
That's great advice. And the authenticity piece especially resonates with Gen Z and millennials that maybe because we grew up with like Facebook and Instagram and getting ads targeted at us all day, every day, we have pretty good antennas to detect when we're being fed BS. And so that authenticity piece is so, so important. And, for better or worse, there's a number of politicians that I could point to that were able to connect with a large amount of the American, public because of their willingness to not be like the polished politician, or to let people see them make jokes, or to get angry, or to just connect in a way that was less consultant-y,
Yeah.
perfect image. And that, I think that is a good lesson, to be vulnerable, to be authentic, and to take the good with the bad.
Yes. Well, so I just want to say thank you again for everything you do. You've provided me hope. I'm so glad we met in Texas. I think this is the start of a beautiful friendship. But to find out more about you or the work that you do, where can people find you?
You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and our website, millennialaction.org.
Okay, well, my last question is, on a daily basis, what puts a smile on your face and brings joy to your heart?
The day can get away from us so quickly, Deke. And so every single morning, I try to start my day by doing something that is active. So go to a workout class, go for a walk, carve out a little bit of time just for me before the day starts. And having that time to just focus on what's inside helps me give my best to all of the people on the outside. And that puts a smile on my face every day.
Well, you do an excellent job of that. And it's like I tell people, even when work gets difficult and everything, you're in a difficult environment. But I just want to say thank you for your smile, because that's what I tell everybody. Even when work is difficult, approach life with a smile, because it always makes it easier. So thank you for yours.
Oh, thank you, Deke. Thank you for your smile too. And thanks for being in this work together with me.
Absolutely. Well, that is all the time we've got. Layla, thank you. Dropping the mic, and we are out.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.